Hey, so I'm Chris Beals. I'm the CEO of Weedmaps, and I'm here with.
I'm Chris Violas, CEO of Blaze. We are a cannabis ERP, and just a pleasure to be on the call with Chris here and share this moment, talk about consumer behavior post-COVID. It's been very interesting, so a lot to talk about today.
Absolutely. And by way of background, Weedmaps, we're sort of the oldest and largest technology company focusing on the cannabis space. We provide a whole sort of platform of software to both cannabis business retailers as well as cannabis brands, enabling them to better manage their data and reach consumers and form sort of relationships. Given that I think Chris, one thing probably we should also mention is, so obviously you as a POS CEO and I as sort of working at Weedmaps on sort of the relationship side. Maybe just talking a little bit about why we're here together and also the ways that we work together.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm happy to take that on. I mean, at the end of the day, both of us, both companies are obsessed with the end consumer, right? In this case, any cannabis consumer. And our job really as infrastructure providers are to make the lives of our operators easier so they can provide a better experience for cannabis consumers to come back and have an enjoyable experience. And so we work together in a number of facets, whether it be sending menu data over to Weedmaps to make sure that the menu that's shown for a particular dispensary is up to date, the prices are accurate, the descriptions are accurate. Or working a little bit deeper in terms of online order integration to make sure that, hey, the end consumer expects updates on orders. They expect things to happen normally. So trying to connect the dots where we can to save time and money for these operators and ultimately provide a better experience for the end consumer.
Yeah, and actually building on that, I mean, one thing we know on our side is that when you provide more robust information to consumers, when you provide brand info, when you have product images, when you have pricing, you're going to have over a 30% higher engagement rate from consumers coming across. And so having a relationship where the retailer, not only just sort of in a static way, but real time is sort of pushing, well, what's my inventory? What's the pricing? Where is it available? That really increases conversion. But then I think with things like sort of the integration where orders coming through are seamlessly porting across, that takes away one of the hardest friction points in any industry, not just cannabis, which is the online to offline sort of transition and how you can make that operationally smooth and easy. And I think that integration, frankly, goes to the heart of one of the biggest pain points for the industry.
No, absolutely. You nailed it. And we've seen so many different trends across the board. Obviously, cannabis in itself is ever evolving. We've seen a lot of acceleration, particularly after COVID, in terms of cannabis operators shifting, dynamically into delivery, shifting dynamically to really have an emphasis on eCommerce. It's been actually really fun to watch. It's been fun to be a part of. And at the end of the day, what we're here to do, like I mentioned earlier, is just we want to smooth this stuff out. We can provide the tools for these operators to really provide the best experience. So when I do place that order online, I know when it says there's an ETA of 30 minutes for pickup, that it's actually true. And I show up and my product's ready and it's just a good experience. And at the end of the day, we want people to come back to that dispensary, get customers that are loyal. And there's a lot of stuff we're going to get to today in the conversation. But as a highlight, I'm pretty excited to dive into some of these trends here.
Yeah, so actually with that, I think you kind of teed me up well, and I'm bearing the dubious distinction of both being the moderator as well as a panelist. So, I think really the thing we wanted to focus on today is how has COVID-19 impacted the cannabis industry, and then sort of what have we as sort of custodians of data seen. So I will flip that question to me to start, and then we can go from there. So. In terms of Weedmaps and what we've seen, we, like I think a lot of people are really quite nervous coming into COVID. What was this going to mean? And frankly, where that started was cannabis businesses. Were they going to be deemed essential businesses? Were they going to stay open? And we, with our policy team, spent a ton of time working on that. There was sort of back and forth in cities like San Francisco and other large markets where we thought they weren't going to be deemed essential businesses. And in fact, they actually weren't. And then course was changed. And I think at the end, the only market we saw, and we sort of service all of North America, but the only notable market that we saw where it wasn't deemed an essential business was Massachusetts. That caused a lot of heartache, a lot of pain for folks. But ultimately, they've now reopened. In terms of what we saw on our platform, I think our initial concern, I think, was replaced with sort of, I think surprise that businesses and consumers still seem to be going out, purchasing, participating in the market as opposed to sort of hunkering down. So, post-COVID, we actually saw our order volume go up about 400% through the platform. That was pretty evenly distributed across markets. The other thing is that we were received inbound requests around enabling curbside or contactless pickup and things like that. And so we were fairly quick to roll out things like better notifications so that when a business said, hey, your order's ready, the consumer was notified at that time. And that there were retailers in Maryland, for instance, that were using that to enable kind of a parking lot queue where you would sort of pull your car around to the front and then you could scan a QR code to receive your product. And that was really important because, frankly, what caused a lot of the issue in the markets where there was concern was queues and lines and crowds and that sort of thing. And so the technology layer was really key to solving that. I'd say in 20 out of 21 of our looking through into the middle of the year, I'd say 20 out of 21 of our major markets had a higher percentage of clients order enabled, and we also saw a steady rise in that order distribution. So as I mentioned, it wasn't sort of narrowed down into one area. One of the things that did come out was definitely the consumers. I think there was a lot of talk about a K-shaped, or is talk about a K-shaped recovery. And we've known from consumer survey work, and I can get to this a little later, that price consciousness is the number one sort of driving motivator for cannabis consumers. Regardless of sort of income level and where that sits, the average cannabis consumer for their income level is more price conscious with respect to cannabis than they would be with respect to other goods. And so, what we saw in our survey work was prior to COVID, about 80% of consumers said price was their top criteria when choosing what cannabis to buy, with about 53, 54, 55% of consumers saying it was their primary criteria. The other factors that then sort of, people, as we looked at sort of what drove folks, was experiences. About 33% of folks interested in quality of product, experience when they shopped, that sort of thing. And then the other thing was convenience, ease of use. How quickly can I do this? Sort of how discreet can I be? That sort of thing. But even as among those two secondary segments, about 60% of those folks still put price as a critical consideration. And so what we saw was, while I think there's a lot of concern about economic recovery and how the average person in the country is doing during COVID, I think where we've seen that bear out is through sort of, I think, increased engagements with things like our deals, price saving segments that's far outpaced growth in other segments of the site, which I think is reflective of, I think, people being even more price conscious, even more concerned. One of the ways we've tried to address that, and something actually we're working on right now with Blaze, is sort of how can we make it easier for consumers to know when something is put on sale or on discount, or separately, how can we make it easier for them to price compare across different products? And so that's really where we view our role as a tech player of meeting consumers where the segment has shifted. I think another thing that we saw is shift in transit and sort of behavior of people and how they traveled. So while we've seen people be willing to drive further to do pickup for cannabis and that sort of thing, the overall impact has been that people drive less. And so, I think the interesting thing is that, as we think about Weedmaps as a platform, when you think about who consumes cannabis frequently, who is the cannabis customer, it's someone who consumes cannabis with a cadence of once per month or more. And that represents, depending on the state, about 5 to maybe up towards 7 or 8% of the population. When we think about Weedmaps, over 90% of Weedmaps users consume cannabis with a cadence of once per month or more. About 73% consume cannabis daily. But the thing, when we think about effective channels to reach consumers, a lot of retailers were sort of taking a shotgun strategy. And as opposed to just focusing on digital, there were a fair amount of folks using out of home and that sort of thing. And so one of the things that we've seen with COVID is people have realized or sort of questioned the use of out of home because there's less traffic out there, but that's also driven a lot of businesses to start to think, well, how good in an online context, or even if it involves the physical pickup of goods nearby, how effective is out of home? And we've seen a lot of retailers saying, look, I don't think we're going to go back to our out-of-home spend, even when traffic resumes, because we're now starting to rethink this logic of, I'm going for about 5 to 8% of the U.S. population. So if I advertise out of home, over 90 cents on the dollar is getting tossed away. But how many people who that's actionable for are actually taking that action? And so that's something that when we think about COVID and where it goes from here, I think that's representative of what we see is that there'll be shifts that kind of go from there, or sort of continue out from there. I think being mindful that I've spoken a lot now. I mean, I guess, and flipping back to my role as moderator, Chris, what have you seen with COVID and sort of the data?
Yeah, and absolutely. You covered quite a bit there. So we'll start at the top, working back. But, first off, obviously when COVID hit, you mentioned, cannabis businesses being deemed essential. Just want to shout out to all those awesome operators out there that really stuck together and as a community said, hey, this is an essential business. There are real patients that need medicine out there. So first off, just for everyone across the U.S., I think they did a fantastic job in running their local associations and getting the word out there. But in terms of the cannabis users, I mean, it's been very interesting to see, obviously as a point of sale provider, we see very interesting data. It's very granular data. And so we'll first talk about just you were talking about how often are these cannabis users consuming, how often are they coming in. And what we saw, it's at least right after COVID. And when I say right after COVID, we're looking about March to call it July period is what I'm referencing here. We saw the average basket size increase about 15 to 20%, which is pretty large for these retailers. And then what we saw after that, which was really interesting, so August, September, we've seen actually a decline in the cart size, however, higher transaction volume. So people are coming back more often. I think a lot of that's due to how they're getting their cannabis. Chris, you just mentioned, folks are driving less, they're on the road less. Well, what does that mean? They're starting to fall back into that e-commerce kind of comfort of, hey, I'm going to Amazon.com. I want to place an order. It's going to be here in 2 days or whatever that may be. And so we saw a huge uptick in deliveries. We saw our delivery platform grow in terms of order volume about 2.5 times after March. And so what that tells me is these operators are doing a great job rolling out delivery and rolling out these kind of out-of-store mechanisms. And customers get a lot more comfortable with that, which is great. So we're seeing a lot of orders coming in through e-commerce. And Chris, you mentioned, I'll rephrase it, but more of an omni-channel approach. These retailers are starting to realize that, hey, digital presence is very big. We have to really focus on that if we really want to maintain our brand, if we want to retain that presence that we have in the marketplace, wherever they may be. And so we've seen a huge uptick in terms of, one, those that weren't taking online orders quickly did. And so the question quickly became, hey, what tools do I have in place to really, be able to do this, but have a really simple setup where I'm not having 10 different systems, let's say, talk to each other. That was really interesting. I think, to your point around online orders enablement, that's been huge, especially for our delivery providers, especially for our storefronts here in Southern California. They're flipping on the Weedmaps online ordering right away just to get that volume, keep that ease of use going for that consumer. And then as far as you mentioned how price sensitive these consumers are right now, and it makes sense, right? With COVID going on, it's hard to tell what's happening. And just a huge shout out to Weedmaps and Chris, your team in particular, in understanding these trends and not just understanding them, but reacting to them and innovating on behalf of our customer base. What you referenced was that the sales and deals pricing mechanism that you guys will be rolling out here really, really shortly. This is awesome. This is something that, again, when we talk about innovation, sometimes these steps innovations are small, but they're super meaningful at the end of the day. I'm very excited to see how this rolls out for us and your team in the coming months here. But yeah, a lot to talk about. I think at the end of the day, I'd love to just continue to talk about the convenience to the customer, that constant communication. You guys talked about how, in Maryland and Maine, you guys rolled out better communications to the consumer. At the end of the day, that's what it's all about. And so for us as technology providers, it's how do we open up the ecosystems to partners like Weedmaps to just better be able to service the customer at the end of the day. So anyways, talked about a lot there, but I think overall, Chris, you and I are agreeing for the most part in terms of, savings is really important. Dispensaries are changing the way they're operating today, which has been really fun to see. And part of that is just being able to provide the tools for these operators to move and pivot as needed.
Yeah, I think, and by the way, I have to say, I think, do things like the work together on sort of turning the price savings and making that available to consumers. Obviously, that's a partnership. I mean, for us to be able to do what we're doing requires, our two systems to talk together. But I think, as we think about this COVID world, I think one of the areas of concern is as long as sort of economic, if we think about a K-shaped recovery or sort of economic, you know, activity in the U.S. potentially being depressed for some period of time, I think it's sort of that thing, the old adage, margin matters, and to the extent that we can, take data or behaviors the retailer's doing and making them more seamlessly translate into consumers coming in through the door, purchasing, that sort of thing. And I think that's important because, the industry is moving forward. There are more licenses opening, the industry is growing, and I think, and they're competing for sort of a consumer base that is growing, but maybe not as fast. And so I think that margin piece is important. One thing I'm curious to pick your brain on a bit is, so we've this move towards, or sort of, I guess it's changes in behavior post-COVID and sort of how persistent they are. So for instance, I alluded to earlier the move towards online. And where we saw that was, at the beginning of the year, we delivered a cost per click to a business of about $1.13. And if you thought about how many of those clicks actually turned into people purchasing, you're basically paying $5.50 for a purchaser. We have not been able to sort of keep up in terms of how many people have moved online and how many people are preferring to shop online. So at this point, as we look into the sort of summer shopping season where we are, we've actually seen our cost per click. So sort of it is cheaper to purchase clicks on Weedmaps, and that's declined by about 20% so far this year, where we're at about 90 cents. And that sort of, conversion cost is about $3.70. And I think that's a reflection of the fact that so many people are moving online that frankly, and this is a good thing because times are tight, but that, it is much cheaper for businesses to now reach those consumers. We simply just haven't been able to keep up with how many people are coming in. But that being said, I think that directionally points to, and I think we have some data around this that I can kind of go into, but I'm curious your thoughts in terms of how much of this sticks, do you think? How much does this behavior stay? Is it here permanently?
Yeah, I would, as far as what I'm seeing, at least my thoughts, my opinion is it is absolutely here to stay. Again, it goes back to, as long as the customer is getting what they're expecting on time and at a reasonable price, they're going to go for convenience. And when you have a platform like Weedmaps that really has pretty much everything you need, from understanding the brand, the product, right, understanding where to get it, how much it costs, being able to place that order, that is very convenient for the customer. And so long as our operators continue to deliver, I think e-commerce is here to stay. I think it's going to be a big focus for 2021. And I will say this, not all e-commerce is created equal. That is absolutely true. And so, things like how easy it is to access a menu, be able to filter the menu. These are huge points that, while they're small, are very, very important. I also will say that, from a loyalty perspective, I think we're going to see a lot more of customers being a little bit more loyal to dispensaries, and we're seeing this a little bit. I'm trying to gather a little bit more data on this, but we've seen a shift to, at least from our dispensaries, folks jumping around less and actually picking a dispensary that, is providing the service that they like. They tend to find, a product category that they're going to hone in on, and then it's brand exploration. And so from there's a lot we can talk about in terms of how we can get the customer exposed to more brands, more products, because there's a lot of different mechanisms you can do. But at the end of the day, I really foresee the retail storefronts being an educational center. And that's for those that are new, really wanting to get their hands, ask their questions live to consumer, to budtenders, let's say, to brand associates, and then going back online from the comfort of their own home to place that order. So I think it's here to stay. Absolutely.
It's interesting because I think I too, we've seen in the data, I think some increase in what you might call like loyalty, but I think on the countervailing side, I'm kind of curious to see where it goes. We've seen this sort of exponential growth and engagement of consumers with deals, or some of our features in search that enable kind of price compare and all that. And I don't have the answer, but I do to some degree wonder if that becomes a leading indicator of people saying, you know what, I really like this store, but they're sort of, they're always price curious, I
Right.
guess. And I don't think we have enough data in this sort of COVID world to know if that's definitively the case. I think, the other thing is obviously retail density. I think if you take how does that loyalty kind of evolve too when the number of retailers moves up to sort of a normalized level? So, for instance, Oklahoma has 2,600 retailers in it. California has about 1,100 retailers right now, which is less than the number of retailers that just LA had pre-Prop 64 under Prop 215. I don't have the answer to that. I'm curious to see, but yeah, I agree then with exactly with what you said, which is, we are seeing purchase cadence go up, and a lot of that purchase cadence being redirected, online back to those same retailers, which I think is good. I mean, that's a good sign. Actually, you alluded to something that I kind of want to explore a little bit. People coming back, people purchasing. How are you seeing, and what are your thoughts on how that purchasing behavior, sort of what an order looks like, how big an order is, what's in an order? How have you kind of seen that evolve kind of through the COVID time?
Yeah, and very interesting point. Like as I mentioned earlier, the what we're seeing is, at least we saw initial, people are stocking for COVID. I'm not sure how long these lockdowns are going to last. So we saw basket sizes really increase up until July, and then all of a sudden, not necessarily take a huge drop, but let's say go down by 2 to 3%. But we're seeing more of those consumers order more often, and so overall increasing gross revenue to that particular shop. But I think they're exploring a little bit more. We're seeing a little bit more differentiation in the basket size. And one of the things that, we're talking about pace of innovation and how retailers are keeping up with the consumer trends. We enabled something called the Blaze Bundle, which is really interesting. It's a simple feature in our platform that allows, retailers to basically create a bundle box. Think of like a Father's Day type of box or a Labor Day box. And really the idea here is that you're going to diversify the products that these consumers normally wouldn't buy, right? You're going to make it maybe 4 or 5 different product types they traditionally don't buy, and put it at a reduced rate for them to try out. We're seeing that really take an uptick. But again, I think the consumer's absolutely price conscious. They're curious. They haven't quite picked a brand yet from what I've seen. Or at least super brand loyal. And so going back to your point around price sensitivity, that seems to be really dictating where they're going right now.
Yeah. Actually, I should probably mention, we did a really widespread kind of consumer survey a couple months ago. And so that's where some of the data I'm citing is coming from. I should have mentioned that earlier. To your point on brand, I think one of the interesting things we saw on that is, more than half of the people we surveyed, about 54%, said they didn't have a favorite brand, which is kind of crazy for something like cannabis, a consumer good that sort of has been around for a long time. I think that's really a huge opportunity, or something that we've seen, which is right now, through our integration. You can actually sort of tag the brand and the brand SKU for menu items that the retailer has, and that brings in all of this rich information. It also means that if consumers search by that brand, they can see retailers nearby that either carry that brand's product or those SKU products. But I think, we've talked a lot about retailers, but I think that also, as we've seen an increase in the number of brand licenses, or licenses that will become brands, your cultivation, your manufacturing, I think that that's a huge area of opportunity as we think about sort of this post-COVID world of how not only how are you going to attack that 54% number, how are you going to make them have a favorite brand? And if you're a retailer, if you think you can sort of grab that site that already says they have a favorite brand, how are you going to get them to come in? How are you going to get them to go from browsing online to coming into your store? I think that'll be an interesting trend to watch, as we go through this.
Yeah, that's I've been very fascinated coming from, more traditional enterprise background, and brand is the name of the game, right? As you go. And obviously that's what we're trying to do in cannabis, but we haven't quite seen anything really, really stick. And obviously the data that you're referencing really shows that. So I think there's a huge opportunity for brands to really, find their place. But I think, 2021 and 2020 is going to be really interesting to watch that consumer behavior. And if it does indeed change, it's going to be really interesting here.
One thing, maybe talking a little bit about maybe taking it, abstracting it up one level from brand to sort of categories. What we've seen with our data is average basket size now over $100. It's
Yep.
closer to 115 for delivery orders and a little bit closer to 100 for pickup orders. And like you, we've kind of seen a sort of a flattening and that sort of thing. But one thing we have seen is that, for instance, edibles is a segment which traditionally were not, they sort of, while I think they garnered a lot of conversation in sort of the media. We're coming up on Halloween, so the annual scare stories about people putting super expensive weed edibles into kids' Halloween bags and all that. But in terms of it capturing a share of basket, I never really saw it sort of take off. And what we've seen through COVID is now it's moving up. That's been the fastest growing segment where, it's in the mid to high 20s in terms of sort of share of wallet. I guess, do you have any thoughts or what have you seen on that side?
No, absolutely. We've seen traditionally edibles have been, in terms of basket size, typically around the fourth or fifth highest category. And we're actually seeing that creep up to number 2 now, which is really interesting. So pre-rolls really took a hit, at least from our side, and what we're seeing. Flowers traditionally been number 1. It's still up there 100%, but it's been a really interesting kind of change in that product dynamic and that product category dynamic of edibles. And I think, again, going back to the stories are out there. I'm sure everyone's had that story of, hey, remember that one time we took that brownie back in college and, you didn't wake up and it was just, for an hour or 2 or whatever it may be. Edibles are they're getting more diversified in terms of what they are, what they can offer. I think the dosage has been, really interesting to come down to those micro doses of 5 milligrams, 2.5 milligrams. These are, things are less scary to these consumers at the end of the day. With all the, especially in California, with all the smoke going on, with all the vape crisis, I mean, there's just so much, there's a lot of health conscious folks out there that are looking for alternatives like edibles. So, we've seen a big shift as well in terms of basket size and seeing that creep up. And again, around the 2 to 3 spot for us in terms of overall product category mix. But again, when you talk about edibles, it's just a wide range of products from drinks, right, down to gummies, down to, the chocolates of the world. So, overall, really interesting to dive deeper into that data a little bit. But overall, edibles as a category as a whole has really jumped up for us.
Yeah. I think one thing we've seen is that, and I think this gets back to the idea of loyalty, but then also who you were attracting. And what we've seen is sort of as we've looked forward, and I promise there's a question in here, but, sort of the hardcore consumers have continued to consume sort of more and more, and they've actually stayed higher. Well, what we can see is sort of the casual or kind of curious folks are the ones who kind of moved up. And I think we're seeing some of that sort of leveling off and sort of amelioration. But I guess, are you hearing anything from retailers or what's your thought? Because I think we perpetually have heard this sort of, this drumbeat of like, oh, well, we're going to go get the hipster dad or the Chardonnay mom or whatever other sort of, funny marketing speak they use for saying, hey, we're going to make our segment people who don't like cannabis, which is in any other industry, people would tell you you're crazy. Given that we are seeing some growth in that sort of non-traditional cannabis user, I guess, what are you hearing or what are your thoughts on that? Is COVID the catalyst for a new wave of cannabis consumer?
I think it is. I think you've got a lot of folks at home that are interested, that have had a few friends that have tried it, that are asking around and, it's, hey, what are we doing? We can't really go anywhere. Not really driving anywhere. We're staying at home. I actually think we're seeing a lot of net new adoption in terms of users that haven't tried cannabis in the past that are bringing it back or trying it for the first time. And again, that just speaks to how important it is to provide that proper e-commerce infrastructure, provide that proper education up front, make this non-scary, make this so when that consumer places that order for the first time, it's not a super scary experience. At the end of the day, that's what got me to start Blaze is when I first ordered back in 2012, right? This is way back in the day. It was a really odd experience. Things changed. Someone was, 2 days late to my delivery. It was just not acceptable. And you're just seeing a lot of professionalism go into the space now. And I'm really grateful for that. I think the industry's matured quite a bit, but it's going down to getting that trust for the consumer and keeping that trust. But a lot of that is just due to the operations. How do you actually fulfill this order? How do you get this out on time? And I think, providing the tools that we do, right, really, at least within the short period that we've seen our online ordering integration on, we're saving about 5 to 7 minutes per order that's just the bud tender side of the house, let alone just a better experience, less rejected orders, right? More pickups that are happening on time, deliveries that are happening on time. So absolutely, I think we're seeing a huge shift in net new customers coming in to cannabis, but partially you got to give props to these operators who are actually building that trust and keeping it. Because that's the worst thing you can do is lose that trust with the consumer.
The thing, and I wanted to jump into this, but I think the integration we have where sort of an order seamlessly goes from Weedmaps, goes over to Blaze, and then at that point, sort of the retailer is able to manipulate that, including putting it into the driver vehicle, sort of there being automatic notifications, hey, your order's done, your order's moving to the vehicle. That sort of communicate. But then what you're alluding to, which is reduction in sort of, the time for the order to be fulfilled, reduction in time for the order to go out. I know we are working on the logistics piece of some route optimization stuff so that, as margins tighten and consumers get more demanding, save on gas, save on time, that sort of thing. But I think that's one of the things that's been most impressive about the integration that we have is we've seen, for folks who are using this integration is they're using the system in a much more effective way. And when we survey consumers, they're much happier with the experience. They're much more likely to come back and order again. And it's simply through two great pieces of software working together and having a handoff. And frankly, maybe a little bit forcing retailers to be a little faster, a little nimbler, a little tighter. I just have to say, and I don't know if there's a question in this, but that really excites me because the number one thing when we go out and survey consumers who are placing orders, and that's offline orders or online orders, it's how communicative are they? Did they switch out items, that were not in stock? That is probably the chief number one, or is definitively the number one complaint. When you have a live menu integration between the POS and the Weedmaps menu, or if they're using the store embed, the e-com embed on the website, that being real-time inventory is critical. You're not switching that inventory out. And then separately, if you on the POS side can say, look, do this, you'll move things through faster. Moving things through faster is more orders, more volume, better margins. Right. That's really critical. But frankly, I think, the thing, if I were to point to one thing in this COVID time to retailers is if you're receiving orders, handle them quickly, be communicative. And I'm not just sort of touting the system and the integration that we have, which handles a lot of that automatically, but it's just generally people are sitting at home. They're a little anxious, they haven't been out in a while. And if they order something, they want it to come in a timely fashion. They want exactly what they ordered. And also people are still not used to receiving cannabis deliveries. So they want a heads up usually, again, preferably automated, the driver's coming close so that, their neighbors or their parents or, the babysitter or whoever isn't like, well, who's this person coming up and delivering something? This unfortunately, this cannabis stigma remains enough that a lot of people sort of want to, I think be very furtive when it comes to receiving cannabis at home or that sort of thing. I guess one question for you is sort of in your role as CEO, and then you think about sort of where you're going, on your mission to make things easier for businesses, to enable them, that sort of thing. What are kind of the big things you want to accomplish, or the sort of thematic areas you're looking to tackle as you move forward to help retailers adapt to what seems like at least an ongoing period of COVID?
Yeah, I mean, number one, we've always doubled down on logistics, embedded logistics within our platform. So having a nice dispatch workflow, whether it be orders coming in online or offline via phone or text message or however they're going to place that, really emphasizing that. That's been a big focus of us for 2021. Or 2020. We're going to continue to do that into 2021. Continue to strengthen our integrations, integrations with Weedmaps, integrations, and just our general API to make sure that, hey, Chris, you're talking a lot about margins, which is the name of the game for retailers, for anyone in business, right? Obviously. So where we can connect the tools, connect the dots for these operators, it saves valuable time, valuable resources for these folks. So we're going to continue to double down on that. We're also looking at a lot of different mechanisms around packaging product or packaging. How do I phrase this the right way? Maybe not packaging, but doing interesting things with direct consumer models, doing interesting things with, I mentioned the Blaze bundle, and really taking that to the next level. We want to continue to innovate and really drive technology change within our operators. So part of that is making this easy to use. The last thing we want to do is create a huge tool that is really complicated and not easy to use. We're really trying to reduce the number of staff that they have, whether that's through automation with integrations here with Weedmaps. But at the end of the day, embedded logistics we're going to continue to double down on. We're going to continue to focus on the integrations through our APIs. We're going to continue to double down on our payments integrations and things like that. So we have a bright future ahead in 2021, but really excited to see where this market's evolving. And we're going to keep talking to our operators, keep talking to Chris, yourself, and your team to say, hey, where are the trends moving? Are they changing? And if so, let's change with them. Let's get ahead of the curve.
And maybe just as a final thing, I think. To a degree that I think very few people realize, except for sort of leaders who are in the industry or sort of people providing technology solutions to the industry, this is a incredibly complex industry from a regulatory viewpoint. I think while the sort of battle cry was always regulate cannabis like alcohol, I think the unfortunate reality for our industry is that cannabis is regulated in all seriousness, I think somewhere between opioids and radioactive material. And you have the added complexity that regulatory regime varies wildly from state to state. I've thought about it before, where I think I'd much rather sort of, I think it's often would probably be easier for people in other industry to service businesses in Europe and service businesses in the US than it is to say service retailers in California and retailers in Michigan. One of the things that we've seen is through with the logistics service is there's a whole compliance layer in there. If you're in California, it automatically stops you from putting more than the state trunk limit into the delivery vehicle. It keeps the GPS tracks of where the drivers have gone. The state mandates you keep those for 90 days. It handles the recording of brakes and that sort of thing. And I think, we built a lot of that, but I think a lot of jurisdictions, this isn't just a California observation, have been slow to enforce those regs because they want to let the industry sort of get its feet under it. But we've seen a pretty notable uptick, and I think this is maybe contrary to what folks might think during COVID, which is a sort of a time of tumult. But we've seen a solid uptick in retailers, downloading and accessing their 90-day delivery logs to show regulators, retailers needing to pull their sort of order manifests. Retailers calling into our customer support saying, hey, I have a regulator here. He wants this, that, and that. Where do I go in the admin to download that? And so I think what that's pointing towards is that despite COVID being sort of, I think, such a radical shift, as it relates to regulators, it seems like regulators or regulatory and sort of policing bodies are still moving forward what appears to be on the same roadmap of saying, here are the regs. We gave you a grace period. Now we're going to start enforcing them. So if you're doing delivery, you better be keeping the GPS tracks. If you're doing pickup orders, you better be checking IDs or sort of receiving digital copies of IDs before filling the order. Some states require that. Look, you're in the teeth of it as sort of with your software solution. What are you hearing about the regulatory side, and how do you think about it in a COVID world or otherwise?
I mean, it's a huge part of our business. I mean, we have a full team dedicated to compliance. I mean, honestly, that all they do is look at the changing regs, both at the local and state level, as well as, across different states. I mean, you look at Massachusetts, who you mentioned earlier. I mean, really starting to innovate. I think they're open in public comment right now for delivery. I mean, what a huge opportunity. But with that comes regulation. With that comes understanding the SOPs that are intended to be in place. From an enforcement side, we are absolutely seeing more enforcement. And it's kind of, at least for me, it's really rewarding when I hear a customer call in and say, hey, I need to download all my manifests to go show, the auditor. I need to go download whatever it may be to go show an auditor, go show a regulator this or that. And it's there. And so I'm super rewarding to have that conversation like, oh, that was what I needed to do. Yes, you guys are doing the right thing. And so, yes, there's more enforcement going on, but at the same time, I think there's a lot of tools are evolving, just like Weedmaps in place to help alleviate that and help make this thing easier. So it's, hey, an audit comes around, it's not scary. We're not hiding anything. It's let's run this report, let's talk about it. And we've seen that both, again, at the local level and the state level here, especially in California, which is where most of our business is at. But from a regulatory standpoint, I mean, we're really excited about the future. I think, we've seen a lot of different states start to adopt relatively similar regulations. Obviously, they do change quite a bit. But again, you're seeing Massachusetts, you're seeing Colorado starting to roll out delivery and other mechanisms to help get that product to the end consumer in more ways than just storefront. These are good trends to see. And I think a lot of that comes down to just, these retailers, these operators, and also these distributors, all the operators, right? Just being vocal and saying, hey, here's the regulations. This is what's working. This is what's not. Let's work together and get this thing across the line to where it makes sense for everyone. So seeing a lot of that. But again, really, I think it's one of the more rewarding moments for me is when I do hear that success story of, hey, we passed the audit and everyone's happy and we're moving on. Like that's the best case scenario. So we're seeing a lot of that here, especially post COVID. I would say May, June, we saw a decent uptick.
Yeah, same. Yeah, I would say, if you're doing delivery and you're not using a system that has, GPS tracking of your drivers, retaining the logs and that sort of thing, if you're in California or several of the other states that do that, you need to be doing that now because, the regulators we have seen that uptick in activity. To your point on Massachusetts, I have to chuckle because the current delivery regs, and we're in the process of building in support for this, are going to require body cams and the storage of historical body cam imagery. And so we're looking at ways to cost effectively receive and compress that body cam imagery. Because if that's where the market's going to be, it's an unfortunate thing. We're hoping that changes. But to the broader point, I think compliance is not pausing for COVID. I think that's the takeaway. And I think, we've covered a lot, but I think if there's one final thing, I think as being good stewards to sort of retailers and brands, it's start getting serious now, especially if you're doing delivery and pickup, that you're complying with the regs for that because it's coming.
Yeah, and I would just leave it with this, as far as the partnership's been just, Chris, absolutely awesome to work with your team, especially over the last 12 months, and a huge shift in just pushing the pace of innovation. Like that's what it's about, right? We want to keep pushing that ball forward and transforming these business in a digital perspective. So kudos to your team and big shout out to them. Additionally, I'm really excited to see the footprint expansion in terms of retailers, in terms of operators. There's a lot of resources out there, whether it be Weedmaps, whether it be Blaze, like continue to leverage us, open up that conversation. We're here to build on your behalf. I'm sure that statement, goes the same for Weedmaps. So we're looking for better engagement. We're looking for more engagement. We want to keep building on behalf of our consumers or behalf of our customers, and with the ultimate goal of making that end consumer journey, the best possible experience. So we can build that trust and maintain that trust.
Yeah, and I'd say, I would echo that. I mean, you've been great partners in sort of getting these integrations together to be able to ideate on something like how we can turn out price savings and that sort of thing, talk to you, and then sort of have it become a reality in essentially 2 months is great. And I think you're absolutely right. I think just like you, we stand here as a partner to our customers. Ultimately, we are a service provider. The software we provide is a service to businesses, and our sort of success is tied to their success. We spend a lot of time making help materials and things like that to make sure people get through just the same as you do. And I think, I would be remiss if I didn't also plug that, look, if you're a retailer thinking about using a POS and you want to have sort of grab on to what seems to be the permanent trend, which is people going online, using Blaze, getting a live integration, having seamless integration of orders, takes and de-frictions that most critical transition point, which is going from the digital realm to the physical realm, getting it in a driver's hands or in a bud tender's hands and getting it into the hand of a consumer in the most expedient fashion. So, with that, Chris, thank you for hopping on and doing this and sort of bouncing some things back and forth. It's been great as always. And thank you.
Yeah, no, thanks, Chris. Thanks for moderating and also answering the questions as well. But appreciate you inviting me here.